Okay. So we got the NFL Week 1 strategy show final look. My first time hosting. We're up to a great start. I wasn't totally sure where my cue was to go. I thought that I was going to get some kind of countdown or something from Nolan, but not the case. So just a little bit of dead air at the top, but whatever. Who cares? These things happen. I'm joined by Geoff Ulrich, the Moose. Look at us going rogue. It's like the Paul Rudd meme, right? Who would have thought?
That's right. I mean, who would have thought, Greg, us on a Week 1 DFS show, they've decided to, join us together on Saturdays to give us a little bit of strategy advice. I'm absolutely thrilled with it, man. I love talking NFL. Saturday's a good day for me. You still got time to stretch out, make decisions. The weight of the world hasn't come down with you. The first snap hasn't taken place. So, I mean, it's a good time to talk about it and, get our thoughts together. So, yeah, man, I mean, Week 1 finally here. It's so weird without preseason this year, but yeah, I'm coming in basically. I just want to play everyone. So, we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad the best ball leagues already decided, right? Everybody who drafted CEH in the top 5 won their best ball leagues on Thursday, but there's still DFS contests to win. There's still $1 million to be won on sites tomorrow, so that's exciting. So, I mean, even if you didn't take CEH second overall in your draft, you still could win at DFS this week. So,
yeah, and I mean, all the CEH love, that's great, but let's remember, other running backs will score touchdowns on Sunday as well. So it was a nice start by him. I think he is going to be fine in that offense. Obviously, I mean, probably don't need to hear me tell you that to legitimize. He didn't catch a pass though. I mean, that was a little weird. I mean, I think everyone kind of thought, but maybe game flow worked into that, and obviously a little bit unsuccessful on the goal line for CEH. 2 situations to monitor going forward, but the Chiefs don't really have that many other options. Darrell Williams is okay, but he's not like a super fast twitch dude or anything. So I think CH probably will improve in those areas and probably be a beast for most of the year.
Yeah, I think one thing I'm kind of interested in with him going forward is, I mean, he was so good other than when he got to the 1 yard line, and then it was just negative runs all day. So I'm kind of conflicted in terms of what we saw from him going forward. Do those negative 1 yard runs that just continue happening on the 1 yard goal line, they kept going to him? Does that mean he loses that gig going forward? Or were they just so confident in him that they kept running it to him? Does that just mean that no matter what happens, he's going to keep getting them?
Yeah, and I think as long as doesn't turn into like a 2 or 3 game swing, you'll probably see the Chiefs keep going to him. So again, I'm not trying to ring alarm bells, but it is something to watch, right? I mean, and again, I think the bigger thing for me was he didn't catch a pass. But I think that's more game flow things. So again, 2 things to keep an eye on, but not really big deals in my mind.
All right, so let's jump into Week 1 and starting with the quarterbacks. The one thing that I've really stood out to me when I'm looking at the ownership, it's pretty flat, right? I mean, we have Lamar Jackson's projected for double-digit ownership, but just barely 10% on DraftKings, 13% on FanDuel, and he's the only quarterback with ownership projected over 7%. Now, one thing about Lamar Jackson, he totally changed how I build my lineups last year. I'm generally somebody who only makes stacks when I build GPP lineups, and I had to totally change how I set up my builds in Fantasy Cruncher because I had to start running some naked Lamar Jackson lineups, which is something I didn't do in the past. And he kind of totally overhauled just how I approach building my lineups. And now I'm kind of unsure what I'm going to be doing with him this year, especially in Week 1. He's so much more expensive than the rest of the field. So how do you feel about Lamar Jackson against the Browns tomorrow?
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, Lamar Jackson throws a wrench into things for me as well. I'm a guy who just likes to come out, look for cheap quarterbacks, look for cheap stacks, and just do game stacks. And it's simple, and you can attack games, and you can go overweight and stuff like that. With Lamar Jackson, you have to think a little bit more. I mean, and you can stack with him, but it's not as I don't really feel it's as optimal. I mean, you have Mark Andrews there as well, who's an expensive tight end, and I kind of like Mark Andrews, but you're paying up for Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews. It really gets your salary up there quite a bit. So, and it's not like regular Week 1s either, Greg, where we don't really have a ton of value to pick from yet. So maybe more injuries will come into play. And there's already a couple. I mean, I think people will probably be looking at the Detroit wide receivers, but it's not like a smash spot even for those guys. So, as I get my ownership, as I screw my ownership page up, but it doesn't matter. Anyways, Lamar Jackson projected to be the highest owned quarterback on the slate. I mean, it's pretty close between the other ones. I have him ranked. I mean, obviously in my projections for Sunday, the top QB. I don't think that's a big shock. The big thing for me is, especially on this Week 1, and there is a lot of unknowns. I have a lot of cheap quarterbacks ranked higher than probably most people, and they're all really close to each other. So I really want to play all these cheap quarterbacks, especially in GPPs. I'm probably going to fade Lamar Jackson week one. The Browns are, I don't know. The Browns are still the Browns. They do have a new coaching staff coming in. Their defense from last year, obviously, still got some really legitimate players, and they did handle the Browns once out of two matchups. So all things considered here, I'm probably going to fade a chalk Lamar Jackson, or I'll just have like lower than the field average of him. I'm sure I'll probably chicken out like Sunday morning, like I got to make some Lamar Jackson lineups. But I don't think it's, quarterback. I still take that old school approach, even with, the way Lamar Jackson changed things. I just don't really feel like you have to pay up on most weeks. For tournaments, we can start talking about some of these guys: Bridgewater, Garoppolo, Minshew, even Mitch Trubisky. All these guys are sticking out to me. I think they have good stacking options, a lot of them too. So that's probably for tournaments where I'll be rolling.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you on Lamar Jackson. I'm definitely not confident enough to just fade him, because at the end of the day, like, I don't want it to be we get one of those games Lamar Jackson scores 35 DraftKings points or whatever, and it's just like, oh, I have zero Lamar Jackson, so I just get crushed for the week. So I'm going to have some exposure to him. I agree with you, though. I'm almost certainly going to be less in the field, and I don't know how much I'm going to stack him with Mark Andrews, with Marquise Brown, or anything like that. I think most of my lineups with him are going to be naked, and then I'll just kind of look for some value to plug in around him. You mentioned how there's a lack of value this week, and there's a couple of reasons. Number one, the biggest reason, no preseason this year, right? Yeah. So usually where most of the value comes from in NFL week one is the pricing comes out before preseason starts, just so the sites could, get their contests promoted and all that. And then players get hurt in the preseason. We just have a bunch of backups that are starting. And since there was no preseason, we don't have those injury situations creating that obvious value. And the other thing, at least on DraftKings, the min salary changed. It used to be 3,000 for running backs. It's only 4,000 this year. So I think there are a couple of 4,000 running backs that we could consider when we get into the position, but we just don't have those like super cheap punt 3K running back options we've had in the past. And that just overall limits the amount of value that we have.
Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say a couple points from the chat. Yes, someone saying, why pay up for Mark Andrews when you can get to Kittle? It's a fair point. I still think the spot is good for Andrews, but that's kind of what had me hesitant on Andrews and stacking with him, right, is the price. So I kind of agree with that point. On the contrary, guys, by the way, just a quick shout out. That's going to be at 3 o'clock Eastern. And I don't know. What were you gonna say, Greg? Should we dive into like the cheap QB talk or anything, or like who you're?
There's definitely one that I want to talk about, and he's somebody you mentioned, and somebody who a couple of years ago, the two of us were really high on, because we've been doing, football shows together on DraftKings for like 3 years now or something like that. And Mitch Trubisky is somebody who a couple of years ago, both you and I were pretty much higher on him than everybody. And he was a really good fantasy quarterback for GPPs. For real life, he kind of sucked at the time, but one of the reasons he was so good for fantasy at the time was because he ran the ball a lot and just would have these games where he'd have like 80 rushing yards, a touchdown, and would have big fantasy games. And then what happened last year, he just stopped running. Like, it was, I don't know if he was injured for a lot of last year or he forgot there was an option. Something changed with the Bears offense where Mitch Trubisky went from running a ton to basically not running at all. And they just killed his fantasy upside. So I'm looking at him this week, and I don't know what to expect from him this year. I think he has the widest range of outcomes of any player at any position for DFS this year, because I think that the upside for Mitch Trubisky is legitimately that he could be like a top 8 fantasy quarterback, right? Like, if he starts running the ball like he did a couple of years ago, he's immense fantasy upside. Now, the downside is he might suck at throwing the football like he did last year, and he might not run, and he might be out of a starting gig like 3 weeks into the season. So the range of outcomes here is ridiculous. I like him for GPPs this week. He doesn't have much ownership. How do you feel about Trubisky?
Yeah, and look, you're right. I forgot you were a Mitch Trubisky truther like me. I mean, this is great. Great start to the show. We're the Mitch Trubisky train, baby. Like, get on it with us, folks. But it was actually 3:30 for On the Contrary, guys, 3:30 Eastern. But and smash that like while you're at it. We really appreciate it. Hit that like. But yeah, the Mitch Trubisky train, folks. You guys got to get on this week one. I mean, look, Greg's 100% right. I started taking Trubisky in some of my late best ball drafts as my third quarterback for this reason alone. The dude has he's got upside for fantasy. I don't care if you think he sucks. And yeah, he absolutely does suck especially last year, right? But his fantasy production, like the upside is there, man. Like, the guy is absolutely a fantastic open field runner if he can break it open again and get some confidence. And I really feel like last year it was just a lack of confidence why he wasn't running. He felt like he should be sitting back there in the pocket. I really feel like Matt Nagy, and I really feel like a lot of Mitch Trubisky's problems are Matt Nagy related. Matt Nagy he just feels like a very controlling coach. Trubisky needs someone different, but maybe this year they figure it out. The matchup week 1 though, I'm enticed. 6 touchdowns and 1 interception versus the Lions last year. I think he's got 330 yards passing. He's done it twice. No, wait, he's done it twice versus the Lions. He's thrown for over 330 yards. I really like this matchup for Allen Robinson too, since we're on the topic. Going up against Jeff Okudah, I know Jeff Okudah is like the 3rd overall pick. It doesn't mean that a rookie cornerback is going to come down and shut Allen Robinson down. I think this is a terrible matchup for a rookie week 1. Desmond Trufant on the other side has been having lower grades. So I like the way this is setting up. The one thing that really had behind Trubisky too for week 1, and you mentioned the rushing, David Montgomery was going to be out a little bit. I think it actually sucks for Trubisky that he's going to play, I think. I don't think it's that big a deal. It's not like it really changes projections that much or anything, but having that every down running back in there probably means maybe a few less runs for Trubisky. So something to think about, but overall, yeah, I'm high on this spot. I'm going to definitely have some exposure. The ownership is getting up there a little bit. I think, I've seen a few other people talking about him, but it's definitely not to the point where he's going to be like the absolute chalk or anything.
Perfect. That's absolutely what I needed heading into week 1 was Mitch Trubisky confirmation bias. That's what we all
come to the right place, friend.
Yeah. If nothing else, when it goes poorly, we at least have somebody else who it's like, hey, we were both way off on this, but it's also a play where I think it probably fails more often than not. It's just the upside is so substantial. His price is cheap. And like you said, even though his ownership is maybe a little higher than what we would have expected, he's still only projected for 5%. So with what I perceive his upside to be with his price tag, I think he's worth taking shots on. One other guy that I think is worth stacking with is Anthony Miller, who I think has potential to be decent this year out of the slot. I think that for more of a DraftKings play than FanDuel, just because of the PPR points, I think that Miller could be decent this year. But yeah, Trubisky, I think as a GPP option certainly makes sense. Somebody else who I'm really struggling with what to make of this year, Cam Newton. Favorable matchup for him against the Dolphins, right in that same price range. And this is another guy who the range of outcomes is really wide. I don't think it's quite as wide as Trubisky, and I have a little bit more confidence in Newton. The other thing that I actually think kind of helps him in a weird way is that he missed so much time last year with the injury that I kind of think this is going to be the freshest version of Newton that we've seen in a few years because he's had so much time off. This is going to allow his shoulder to get healed because that's been an issue. He's had issues just overall with the health of his shoulder. He had surgery. And I think that probably contributed to a lot of his inaccuracies. Not to say that like peak Cam Newton was, like a marksman quarterback who was just throwing strikes over the middle of the field, but he was so ridiculously inaccurate when we saw him play last year. And I think that the shoulder injury played a big part in that. And the time off, I think, is going to help him. So going up against the Dolphins in week 1, I think that he makes sense to GPP play. How much confidence do you have, if any, in Cam Newton?
Yeah, I mean, I really actually like his touchdown prop if you can find it. I think on the DK Sportsbook, it was around plus 300 for him to rush for a touchdown. I like that. And, if I like that and I like Cam to come out and be aggressive near the goal line, rushing and stuff like that. And the Patriots have talked up about his rushing ability. I really feel like Josh McDaniels is going to get him in some good situations to be a rusher. You kind of have to like him at this price for DFS. The more I think about this matchup in Cam Newton, I almost think he's probably like a pretty viable cash option. He's not overly expensive. I agree. Like I trust him more and the Patriots in this spot than I do Trubisky. I am someone who'd probably be crazy enough to roll Trubisky in a cash lineup, but that doesn't make him the optimal play. That's just what I would do. Neither of these guys that we're talking about either are going to be like the overly chalk. Cam projecting out in the Awesemo projections 5.9% on DK. So that's nice. And again, it's like a lesser version of Lamar Jackson. I don't think you have to pair Cam Newton with anyone from the Patriots. I don't think you should, because like you're kind of, we're all guessing here. Like N'Keal Carey, I've heard he's peppering Edelman. That's great. Maybe you go Edelman and just hope it like ends up like a mini version of Tom Brady and he gets like 10 targets. But I think you're kind of throwing darts with the Patriots receivers. So a naked Cam Newton stack makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Edelman paired with Newton. The concern I have there is I just can't imagine Edelman's going to be as successful out of the slot as he was with Tom Brady. Just Cam Newton's so inaccurate throwing the ball over the middle compared to a guy like Brady that I think that Edelman takes a pretty big hit playing with Newton. But it still remains to be seen. We haven't seen Newton really play in 2 years. Who knows what he's going to look like? That's another guy. The range of outcomes is pretty wide. And just another guy in that mid-tier price range where, I think there's a lot of upside in him. And that's one of the other reasons that when we talked about Lamar Jackson, I'm going to be underweight to the field on him, is there just all these quarterbacks for like $2,000 cheaper or more that I think have maybe not the same upside, but close-ish, and are also just, like we've said, without a ton of value on the slate. It just makes sense that this is a spot to save money.
Strammy in the chat made a good one. Demir Bird, 3.2K, wide receiver 3, experience playing with Cam in Carolina. So actually, again, if you're going to pair Cam with someone, like take a shot with someone like that. I like that. Sorry, I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Bring it up. Free flowing show. It is not a big deal. And then one thing for people who are not in the premium chat, if you sign up today for an Awesemo Plus NFL Weekly Pass, you get 50% off and use the promo code REDZONE at checkout. $7.50 for 1 week of Awesemo Plus. It gives you access to all of the Awesemo's leading player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, and more for NFL DFS. Limited time offer, only valid through September 15th. So that is midway through next week. Head over to Awesemo Plus, join the page at awesemo.com, or check it out on Twitter and click the link. So my first show hosting, I hope I don't get in trouble for just giving away a package for 50% off, but hey, that's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing. So if this is the last time I host, it's because I gave away too much free stuff, too much half-price memberships. So going back to the quarterbacks now, somebody else who is pretty highly projected ownership relative to the field anyway is Carson Wentz at 6,300 against the Washington football team. So here's the deal with Wentz. That offensive line for the Eagles is banged up, right?
Mm-hmm.
We haven't even started the season. They've already changed Jason Peters' position. He requested a salary increase just to change where he was playing on the offensive line, which that's crazy, but whatever, it is what it is. Then he also has 2 starting offensive linemen already out for the season. And then going up against Washington, who have, I think, what's going to be a really underrated defense to open the season. They added Chase Young. They already had a strong defensive line. I look at the ownership of Carson Wentz, and I am not nearly as confident as the field is. I get that Washington didn't have a great defense last year. I think it's going to be improved this year, and I have massive concerns about the Eagles' offensive line. Do you feel any differently about Wentz this week?
No, not really. There's a reason. Like I kind of brought up the cheap QBs like after Lamar. I mean, I bypassed Carson Wentz in this spot. That is the strength of the Redskins defense, or the football team's defense.
It's tough. It's gonna be tough reminding.
I've actually been pretty good with it until now, but it's a tough spot, man. Like, I mean, they could absolutely take down Carson Wentz for 5 or 6 sacks. It would not shock me. I think their secondary is bad enough that Wentz will probably, be able to get around, at least squeak out a win. But I don't have a ton of confidence in Carson Wentz, honestly. It's just someone I just don't play that often. The Eagles tend to be a team where, I don't know. I mean, Jalen Reagor's back, so I guess that bumps up his upside a little bit. But for me, the play in there will be the running backs. I'm interested in Boston Scott kind of as like a tournament pivot, possibly. We'll see if we get any reports on Miles Sanders' usage. I know a couple people in the chat were asking about him. We'll get to him when we hit running backs. But I think for Wentz, I mean, I think the price is probably drawing people there, which makes sense. And I mean, like a big favorite quarterback. I don't absolutely hate the spot, but again, and I primarily play GPPs in NFL. I'd probably build a cash lineup for week 1, but I don't think I'd go to Wentz. I think I'd feel better just taking a shot on a cheaper quarterback because, again, we don't have a ton of value, and I really feel like the savings that you get by going down this week is going to be more important. So it's not the worst spot, but I do feel like the pass rush and Washington, absolutely. I also just don't have confidence in, the wide receivers there for Philly that much. So all things considered for GPPs, the guy I'd rather try and get up to is Russell Wilson, who is – I think he's projected around the 5th most expensive or most owned, lower ownership than Wentz. And again, you're paying up for that lower ownership, which I like. I think Wilson and the Seahawks are going to come out and pass the ball a little bit more in week 1 than people think. That's my take. It's not really based on anything more than just reading tea leaves, but I love the matchup for DK Metcalf. Absolutely think he's going to destroy there. And if I think that, then Wilson's going to have a big day.
So before we move on to the next position, just because we talked about Wentz, that I'm going to tie it in here and try not to jump around too much, but Washington's defense is min price. They're projected for almost no ownership this week, like literally almost no ownership. I think the last I looked, they were like 0.2% projected ownership. If that's the case and Carson Wentz is going to be really chalky, I think that's such a good leverage spot because the Washington front seven, like I mentioned, now that they've added Chase Young also, and then you add that to how banged up the Eagles' offensive line is. They've lost 2 of 5 starters. They're moving Jason Peters' position around. If Washington's defense is better than it was last year, I don't think it's ridiculous to think they rack up a few sacks. We're hurting for value on this slate. That to me is one of the more logical ways to get leverage on this slate and look for a little bit of value. Do you feel the same way, or is that just totally crazy?
Yeah, no, I like it. I mean, look, I am definitely, and for a cash lineup, I would probably rather go to the Jets. You got Greg Williams going up against Josh Allen. Josh Allen turned the ball over like 3 times in week 1 last year. Greg Williams will bring pressure on Josh Allen. I like that spot more for a safe floor play, but yeah, man, absolutely. I mean, I am using cheap defenses this week. Like I will take shots. I might use the Seahawks at 2,400. I will use Washington at 2K because like Greg said, there's just not much other places to get to save a lot of money. And look, DST, who cares if these teams are bad? It's such a variable spot. Like you get one like Chase Young, like sack touchdown, boom. You're like 2K, you're absolutely set. You're killing the field. Even if Washington sucks for the rest of the day. So yeah, absolutely a spot I'll be looking towards in GPPs.
Yeah, it's such a high variance position. I always think it makes sense to save money there. And the other thing too
especially on a slate like this.
Yeah. The other thing too that people don't realize is just because the team's projected to win by 10 points, it doesn't even mean that's a good spot for the defense. Because you just don't know what's going to happen. It's such a high variance position.
And a lot of times these big defenses that are heavy favorites will get up and then they'll just play lax the rest of the game. They won't be going for turnovers, right? Like you want turnovers, you want chaos. When teams get up, that's kind of when they just sit back and they're like, okay, yeah, get a 10-yard pass, get a 10-yard pass. We're not going to do anything. And then you get no chaos, you get no variance, and your team ends up with like 8 points and you paid like $3,700 for them. So that's why I love paying down on defense whenever you can.
All right. So moving on to running backs, the player on the slate who's projected for the most ownership, no surprise, Christian McCaffrey also comes with a very steep 10,000 price tag on DraftKings. He is 10,000 also on FanDuel, so the exact same price on both sites. Projected for big ownership on both. Are you going to pay up for McCaffrey at 10,000? It's hard to deny the upside there. To me, he's more of a cash play than a GPP play, just because I know what we're getting out of him. He has a really safe floor. I don't want to fade him in tournaments or anything like that, but I feel like I'm going to be lower than the field on him, just because, like we said, there isn't quite as much value as we've had on other week 1 slates.
Yeah. So with McCaffrey, legitimately hard to fit into cash lineups, it feels like right now. I know I had a couple people asking in the chat, should you fade him? I mean, it's setting up like I actually think I don't want to fade him either, but it is like the builds that you make with him, you don't feel good about really. Like you've got to stuff in some receivers that aren't good. I actually am leaning towards the idea that he might be a good fade for in cash games, and you just pay up at a couple other spots. But again, we're getting more injury news as it's coming, and that could change. So not a must fade or anything like that at the price, but he's definitely not like the lock that he has been in weeks past, where it's just easy to get up to him and you don't have to worry too much. I think you should probably still try and get him in there, but I'm not going to put him out there as like a must start in those kind of lineups. For GPPs, I think my take is, and we didn't talk about Teddy Bridgewater. I do like Teddy Bridgewater this week too, but pure GPP play, really going up against the weak Raiders secondary there. You got some good matchups, but McCaffrey's still going to be involved in any passing game as well. So for tournaments, if you're going to play McCaffrey, just play it as part of like a Panther stack. Like start Bridgewater, start Curtis Samuel with them or something like that. Go for a 3-man stack. Play Josh Jacobs on the other side. Everyone's going to play Josh Jacobs and Christian McCaffrey, but I don't think that many people are going to play them together, right? So I kind of like the double pay up game stack there for the Raiders and Panthers. I think that is a game that could get a little bit crazy. You could see some broken plays. You got bad defense, really bad defense on the Panthers, and a really, really bad secondary with guys. McCaffrey could get loose in the slot. Curtis Samuel could get loose in the slot. LaMarcus Joyner, I think he was graded the worst slot corner in the year of 2019. there's some really good matchups for the receiving core there of the Panthers. So maybe playing with Bridgewater and Samuel McCaffrey, and I think that's how you get a little bit unique with them in tournaments.
Yeah, and the other funny thing about the correlation stack you mentioned there, which I agree with, that makes sense. I mean, McCaffrey could very well be the leading receiver for the Panthers this year. I don't think that's crazy. So you could just kind of roster him almost as if he's a wide receiver. And then the reason that stack also makes sense is, I mean, the Panthers' run defense is probably going to be terrible this year. I mean, they were last in DVOA last year. There's no reason to think they're going to be better this season.
Yeah,
so
they're not going to be better without Luke Kuechly, right? So.
No, for sure not. I mean, they lost one of the best linebackers in the NFL when they already had the worst run defense in the league. So we look at Josh Jacobs at 6,800. The question I really have with him this year, which I don't think matters as much when he's only a 6,800 price tag, because it's still relatively cheap. It looks like it's going to be a favorable game script. Is he going to catch passes this year? Yeah. My gut feeling is probably no, because they signed Jalen Richard to a big contract extension, which leads me to think that, why would they give him that contract unless they still want to play that pass catching role? There's no way that Jacobs catches less passes than he did last year, but 6,800 in a plus matchup, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm on board with him.
Yeah, and I'm going to have shares of Jacob. I will say this. I love Joe Mixon as a pivot play here. I think people are overlooking his spot. I mean, they're not completely overlooking it. It's not like he's going like 3% owned, but he'll probably be close to half the ownership. He's projecting out around that. He's projecting under 10% in the Awesemo projections. I'll throw that out there for you guys. But no Derwin James for the Chargers. The Chargers were not a good run defense last year. Like, they were not good. That is definitely their soft spot. Not great against, I think they were like a bottom 5 team in terms of allowing fantasy points to the RB position, definitely bottom 10. But, Mixon was getting the big workload. And in a rookie's first game, like I can't see the Bengals plan not to give Joe Mixon like 25 touches in this game. I know we're all waiting for Mixon to become like that receiver. Maybe this is where it happens too. I mean, that's the nice thing about week 1. You can at least talk yourself into it. Okay, maybe it's the spot where Joe Mixon gets like 8 targets. And if I roster him here at actually a fine price, I think, you're getting a little bit ahead of the game. But the nice thing is, even if that doesn't happen, the matchup is good enough where he could go off just with rushes and like a multi-touchdown spot. So I like the Bengals kind of for an upset here too, week 1, Greg, as we're talking about it. And I really like Mixon in tournaments. And if you want to fade Jacobs, and again, I'm going to have exposure to Jacobs, but I'm also going to fade him in a lot of lineups. Going to Waller at tight end as another, kind of a pivot, because I don't think that many people are going to use Darren Waller on the Raiders, is kind of a good move too, if you're making like a Carolina stack. So
there's one other running back who's projected for a massive amount of ownership today, and it is not in a good matchup, and that's Alvin Kamara. He's 7,200 on DraftKings, projected for almost 20% ownership, second highest projected ownership on the slate at the position, just behind Christian McCaffrey. So I'm struggling a little bit with the Kamara thing. First, I was kind of thinking a couple of weeks ago he wasn't going to play in week 1. It looked like he was going to be a holdout candidate, but that's no longer an issue. But still, I look at Kamara. The Bucs had a ridiculously good run defense last year. They finished first overall in DVOA against the run, and Kamara struggled to run against them. I mean, pretty much every team struggled to run against them. But I mean, the other thing with Kamara is that he's so much receiving ability that maybe it doesn't matter if he can't run the ball this game, because they might just give him, 10 receptions. That might be how they get around the really good Bucs run defenses. They just dump off a lot of short little screen type passes to Kamara, and then it doesn't matter. So that's kind of where I struggle is I look at his ownership projection, the matchup, and what his salary is, and I'm just trying to figure out like how much room do I want in GPPs, because I do want some of them. It's definitely going to be a very good game environment, at least on paper, high total. I just don't know if I like him quite as much as the field.
Yeah, Kamara is going to be one of those guys for me. I don't think I'm going to be like sprinkling him into lineups. Like, he's not going to be like a core piece for me. So I won't be over the field either. He'll be part of like a Tampa Bay, New Orleans game stack build for me. I'll sprinkle him into 1 or 2 of those, because I definitely will have pieces of I'll have lineups centered around that game. I do think that, with the Saints at home, these 2 quarterbacks and the Bucs offense projecting to be one of the best in the league, I'm going to get like game stacks here, because I do feel like we have a shot of like a 40-38 game, right? I think it's got the second or first highest projected game total on the slate. So, Kamara, I agree. The spot's not good. And I was actually surprised to see his ownership up there. I probably would have, figured to take a few more shots with him, or maybe even gone overweight if the ownership wasn't up, which I thought, I didn't think he would be projecting to be a highly owned play, but he's up there. People like Kamara, and I guess he's such a big discount off McCaffrey that's probably drawing people to it. People maybe still not 100% on board with Jacobs and then Eckler. So, but that's how I'm approaching Kamara too. Like, I think the matchup is terrible. I'm not really sold on Kamara being up to the level of skill of McCaffrey either. So, like, I don't want to say I'm biased. I'm just not really like an Alvin Kamara truther, right? So he's not a guy I'm like, I got to get like Kamara in my lineups. I do think this is a spot, though, where you can see a ton of points in this game. I'll have game stacks. I just won't be over the field in Kamara.
All right. So you weren't able to talk me off Mitch Trubisky, but there's another value play I really like at running back, and maybe you'll talk me off this one.
Probably not.
Well, who do you think is my favorite cheap running back on the slate? I'm just going to give you a name, and I'm going to give you a guess and see if you can figure out who it is.
Cheap running back, I'll say Chris Thompson.
All right, it is Chris Thompson. So, I mean, I just look at the Jaguars running back situation, and there's a couple things. First, Chris Thompson's really talented, and he's a good fantasy player when he actually gets touches, and he's super efficient in the passing game. The Jaguars are going to stink this year. Their offense is going to be terrible. The spread for this game seems to indicate that they're over or touchdown underdog. So this seems to be the perfect game script for Thompson. And the other thing to consider, too, is that, we just don't know who's going to play running back for them. They cut Fournette right before the season. So it's a little up in the air. I don't know how many touches Chris Thompson's going to get, but I do know this. If there's any time you want to roster Chris Thompson, it's in week 1 when he's actually healthy. Because this is the only time we know that he's going to be healthy coming into a game. It could be the only time all season. This seems to be the perfect game script for him. He's 4,000. He's overall my favorite value play on the slate. I know the people are going to want to roster James Robinson also. He's actually projected for slightly more ownership than Thompson. Yeah. But I really like Thompson. He's going to be a core play for me. Can you talk me off him or no?
I'm not talking off Chris Thompson, man. Get more Chris Thompson in your lineups. I mean, absolutely. Greg pretty much went over everything I would have said about Chris Thompson. I mean, I'll throw a couple more coals on the fire here. Guess who allowed the most receptions to opposing running backs last year? I mean, it was the Indianapolis Colts. Like, this is prime Chris Thompson matchup. I know James Robinson is getting a little bit of fanfare and stuff like that, but it's not like it's not like the Jaguars are good at like running the ball, right? I mean, this is a spot where they're projected to be losing by more than a touchdown. Chris Thompson is the only veteran running back on the roster right now. He's got experience with the head coach. Yeah, dude, like, I'm surprised Chris Thompson isn't being like the smash value spot of the slate. The more and more I think about it, I actually have to remind myself to play Chris Thompson because he's getting talked up so little this week. Absolutely. And look, we didn't really get to Gardner Minshew as part of the cheap QBs, but you're playing a Jaguar stack with Minshew, throw him in there, man. Chark, Thompson, Minshew, that's one of my favorite stacks too this week. You can come back with Marlon Mack on the other side while we're talking about running backs. He's absolutely smashed the Jaguars D in a couple matchups. And, everyone's kind of scared of Jonathan Taylor. I'm not scared of playing Marlon Mack this week. Jonathan Taylor, the last blurb I read on him, he's going to get mixed in. Like, he's not coming in early in the game. Yes, he'll make an appearance. He'll probably steal a couple carries. But if Mack gets off to a good start, I think you'll see mainly Marlon Mack in this game. And again, this is a great matchup at 5,300. So like a lot of pieces in this game as well, absolutely love Chris Thompson. I think he's cash game viable. Don't have anything bad to say. I will say this: there's one other running back at 4K I think could pay off and probably will be like under 1% owned. J.D. McKissick in Washington. Similar story. Like, they're projected to be behind. Everyone's on this Antonio Gibson guy. He's not even a pure running back. Like, I could see Antonio Gibson being on the field getting like 5 touches this game. I think McKissick has a better chance of really smashing value there. He's the passing down back. So GPPs, I'll mix him in, but Thompson I think projects out as the safer, better play. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to do with the Washington running back situation. I think it's just going to be a spot I don't have a lot of exposure to. I just have no confidence, and I really like Chris Thompson, so that's just kind of where that's just where I want to invest my money. As I look at Chris Thompson, I'm like, this is the 4K running back I have the most faith in. He's somebody who I know is a good fantasy producer when he gets touches. So I'm just going to roster him. I'm going to avoid Washington. I don't feel nearly as comfortable in Marlon Mack as you do. It's just, Naheem Hines is still there also. Taylor is going to get touches. I just can't imagine that they invested a second-round pick in Jonathan Taylor to not give him a decent amount of run. So that's really my concern there. I think there's going to be 3 guys getting touches in the Colts backfield. I agree with you that if Mac is to get the bulk of the touches, it's a great spot for him. I'm just not totally confident that's the case. There's a lot of these kind of timeshare situations that I'm just not confident enough to make an investment in.
Yeah, and look, James in the chat making a good point. I mean, James Robinson he's like a pretty decent prospect for a UDFA, but I agree. The thing is, guys, like how many carries is James Robinson going to get when the Jaguars are down by 10 with like a quarter and a half to go? Like you're going to see Chris Thompson on the field a lot. So it's not an anti-James Robinson take by us. It's a game flow thing. You really got to look at and think about how the games are going to go. Could it flip and James Robinson and the Jags win this game? Absolutely. But the most likely scenario, Jags are going to be down. Chris Thompson's going to get a lot of run. And the PPR points, right? How for sure. James Robinson going to catch? Probably none, to be honest. So,
and that's really the main reason I like Chris Thompson. It's just the way I look at the game flow setup, which actually then kind of makes me like Chris Thompson for your leagues too. And that's why I drafted him in best ball a decent amount, is because the Jaguars have the lowest team total of any team in the league this year. They're going to lose almost every game. They're going to be losing most of the time. So that just all sets up really well for Chris Thompson. Looking at the other running backs, we do have a couple injury situations to talk about. You mentioned Boston Scott earlier. Miles Sanders was limited in practice on Friday. He's officially listed as questionable on the injury report. It's a tough situation to figure out, and it's something we need a little bit more information on because there's been rumors that Sanders could be limited into week 1. We don't know that for sure, though. You mentioned Boston Scott. So what kind of information will we need to come out on Sanders for you to really make a significant investment in Scott?
So, yeah, I'll be quick here because we should probably move on to wide receiver soon. But like Boston Scott is obviously pure GPP play. If you get confirmation that either, Sanders not 100% or he's not going to just get his full complement of carries, which is kind of looks like it's trending towards, I think Boston Scott GPPs makes a ton of sense. Pass rush, bad Philly O-line. That means more dump offs to Scott. We saw him in that, excel in that role. He's a good player. I do not mind taking a shot there. Maybe use him and Carson Wentz together. I don't know. But definitely, I will probably throw him in a lineup or two if we get good news on that. If it's just like Sanders is probably going to play his regular workload, just avoid it. It's not worth it. But yeah, that's my take on Boston Scott.
All right. So moving on to wide receivers, we have had some news that came out as we were doing this show. Mike Evans was doubtful to play. He's been upgraded to questionable. With that information in mind, what are you doing with the Tampa Bay wide receivers and new quarterback Tom Brady this weekend?
Yeah, my plan was to play a little Scotty Miller. I might still play. Honestly, I might throw him in there. Let's go over the ownerships here because I gotta take a refresher. I've kind of avoided this situation in my mind because of Evans, questionability, but Godwin obviously now projecting to be looks like around the third or fourth highest owned player on DK. That worries me a bit. And it's not like I'm anti Chris Godwin or anything. It's just I don't know, man. I mean, it is still a tough Saints pass defense. I wanted to play Mike Evans in this spot. I really wanted him. I really wanted Mike Evans to come out healthy, be a little bit lower owned than Godwin. Everyone would probably be scared off Evans because of the matchup with Lattimore. But now that he's not 100%, it's hard for me to give that take at all. I mean, he could just be out there as a decoy easily week 1, and you could see Godwin, guys like Scotty Miller, maybe Gronk. So I don't really know. Like I said, I want to get exposure to this game. I'm still pretty undecided on who I want to pair Brady with. Maybe I'll just eat the chalk and get a little Godwin exposure and make it, I think there's a lot of ways you can make it contrarian with Godwin and Brady by going to a guy like Scotty Miller as your third wheel or something, which is nice. Obviously, there's a lot of variance in playing a guy like that. I don't really know what his snap count's going to be. Maybe he's on the field for 10 plays. Maybe he plays 70% of the game. That's literally the range of outcomes there for Scotty Miller. But I am sold on him as a player. I think he will be a part of the Tampa offense. And then the other play is Gronk. I might just pair Brady with Gronk in the spot and just call it a day. So, and then just come back on the other side with some of the higher owned Saints. I'm probably not going to pay up for Godwin in cash unless I don't know. It's a weird spot. I honestly, hopefully you have a better take than me because I don't really know what to do with the Tampa Bay wide receivers yet.
Yeah, so I don't have a better take than you, and here's why. I just assumed coming into the show that Mike Evans was doubtful and that he wasn't going to play, and then he got upgraded to questionable when we were 5 minutes into the show. I saw that came across. I was like, well, crap. Now I don't really know what to do with the situation. So I'm going to have to hedge a little bit and be non-committal, but it's just going to depend what happens with Mike Evans because I will say this: if he's out, I do think that Chris Godwin makes much more sense in terms of the chemistry with Brady than Evans does, just because I don't think Brady has that same arm strength to throw the ball downfield like he did in previous years. And I just see Godwin playing in that Julian Edelman type role in the slot where he's going to catch a lot of passes over the middle. And it just stands to reason to me that his target share would go up if Evans is out. You mentioned Gronk also. I feel like it's such a fish move to play Gronk this week, but I kind of want to do it anyway, just because it's like there was no preseason. We don't know what Brady's rapport is going to be like with these wide receivers. We know that he's comfortable with Gronk. And to me, I just think that there's going to be a little bit of familiarity there where he's just like, hey, this is the guy I've played with for all these years. I'm comfortable with, and I'm going to give him targets. Gronkowski is projected for almost no ownership, and he's pretty cheap. So I don't think it's a bad option. I just feel like it's just such a fish play to go like, I'm rostering Gronkowski in 2020.
I know it does feel bad. He's pretty cheap though. And like if you go Brady Gronk, you can fit in like a lot of the other Saints on the other side. So again, I'm still undecided on exactly how I'm going to go about making those rosters. But guys, I see there's like over 400 of you in the watching now. So if you guys could hit that like, let's get up to over 100 likes for the show. That'd be awesome. We really appreciate you guys watching. If you got questions, I am trying to check the chat a little bit. So if there's anything big, we'll try and hit them on the end. But give us your take on the Tampa Bay situation. I still am going to mix in Scotty Miller because I'm an idiot, but I don't mind taking a shot with him there. I think that is kind of a good third wheel to make your Brady stacks a little bit unique anyways. Well, not a little bit unique, actually probably really unique. So.
And something else that can help you build your lineups, you go to awesemo.com. We do have some free content up on the site today. The NFL rankings are free, so that takes all of the players from Awesemo, that's Alex Baker's projections, and he gives them a ranking, A, B, C, D. You don't want to roster anybody who's an E. That means that it's a backup quarterback or something like that. Definitely a bad play, but that's a good way to just go through, see how some of the players you like, how they rank out. A good way to start building your lineups. On the high end of wide receivers, Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, Julio Jones. Of these guys, I like Adams the most relative to his price. I mean, going up against the Vikings, the Packers receiving core is pretty thin this year. And I just think Devontae Adams is going to get a million targets. I think he's a little bit mispriced. Michael Thomas is going to be the chalk at the position, but it's hard for me to justify paying $9,000 for him when we could get Devontae Adams for $1,700 cheaper. How do you feel?
I love Devontae Adams. Just like season long and pretty much in this game as well. Minnesota got rid of basically their top three corners in the offseason. They got like Mike Hughes, a rookie, and Holton Hill, who basically like got suspended of all last year for like PEDs. So now he's coming off the PEDs. In theory, it's going to be worse. Dude, Devontae Adams is going to mash this year. I think he's going to be the number one wide receiver in fantasy. And why not play him here, like in a great matchup against a really weak Minnesota? I'm not sold on Minnesota at all. Daniel Hunter's out as well. I actually really like Green Bay in this game. I don't know why they're underdogs. Just throw that out there. But give me some Devontae Adams. I agree. I don't mind paying up for Julio either, though. I think if I'm going to do like a double pay up wide receiver lineup, it would probably be Julio and Devontae Adams. The matchup for Julio isn't as good, but he's Julio Jones, and that is a big game total attached. I think Seattle could get out front, and you could just see like a 12 target game for Julio. So definitely like Devontae Adams better just as a pure play, but I don't mind either of those guys. Adams will be a guy I'll be overweight on. I'll try and sprinkle in, and Jones will be more of like just a kind of a game stack with Seattle for me. So.
Yeah, so the other thing, too, you mentioned with Julio Jones, I think makes him make a lot of sense for stacks. Is there have been a lot of rumors that this is going to be like the unlock Russ year, right? Where we're just going to see the Seahawks throw the ball a ton more. So if that's the case, that game would be ridiculously high scoring. And that's probably the game I have the most interest in making a game stack of. And it's hard to justify making those lineups without Julio Jones, without Calvin Ridley. Exactly. I like Todd Gurley a little bit this week, too. He'll be mixed in.
Yeah.
One other wide receiver news item that we should hit. Kenny Golladay is doubtful to play. Yeah. So assuming that he's out, Marvin Jones is probably going to be one of the chalkier plays on the slate. And you talk about a guy who's sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe crap. And it's Marvin Jones. This is a guy who it's like 3 touchdowns or like 2 catches for 12 yards and not much in between. So a little worried about rostering him when he's that chalky because the downside is so low. But at the same time, too, it's tough to not get exposure to him when it's in a good spot, when he's in a potentially elevated target role and his ownership is going to be high just because the upside is so significant for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way. I mean, Marvin Jones is a guy I like to target when he's like, under 5% owned. You can throw him in like a little stack or something. And, if he goes off, great, and you get good leverage. But, man, it is tough to avoid him, though. Like, we don't have a ton of other value spots opening, wide receiver especially. You get TY in there. I think Metcalf is fine, but like there's not many guys under them at price range on DK. So it might be a spot where you just eat it and especially for cash games and just get him in there. And again, if he busts, he's probably going to be highly owned anyways. So I think he's a good enough player that he's probably not going to do like a full like disappearing act or anything. But he does profile more as a wide receiver too, right? Like he's always kind of benefited from that in Detroit of being more the second wheel. He gets the off coverage. He gets the single coverage where Stafford will take shots. It's a really good touchdown producer. I hate trusting him more as a wide receiver one though. So I agree. Maybe Marvin Hall, down there at 3,900 is the play. I don't have like a huge take on him. He's a bit smaller dude. He's not going to be up there like, balling over people like Galladay, but he can get downfield a little bit. He's had some connection with Stafford. So GPPs, absolutely, like definitely don't mind, mixing him in. Amendola is questionable too, which would really probably bump up Hall. So, I mean, I'm not sure it's a hamstring, game time decision, limited. So I imagine Amendola is going to play, but like if for some reason Galladay and Amendola missed, I mean, Marvin Hall would probably be bumped up to near must play, I guess. I mean, basically the two healthy wide receivers and then like rookie. So interesting spot to watch. It's probably where a lot of people are going to go for value this week.
I will say that I think the Bears should be a pretty significant favorite in that game against the Lions, which isn't the case. So that's the spot, at least for like betting wise, that I'm most confident. I think the Lions are off in that spot. And also we're maybe a little bit higher on Mitch Trubisky to 2 us than anybody else in the world. So I think that also might play a little bit of a factor. Yeah. So moving on to the tight ends now. George Kittle, way more expensive than every other tight end, also projected to be the highest owned on DraftKings. He's projected to be the highest owned tight end on FanDuel. I struggle a little bit to get up to the price tag, but it's such a good matchup for him against the Cardinals. He's not going to be my highest owned tight end. I think I prefer Ertz a little bit more for the price. Do you feel differently, or do you have a strong feel towards Kittle?
No, I mean, generally paying up for tight ends is just something like it just doesn't work out, to be honest. I mean, not that George Kittle obviously can't go nuts in this spot, but you just need such a big game from a $7,200 tight end. And I mean, realistically, it is one of those slates where, I considered it just because I don't have like a huge hot take of value guys like I'm really, really sold on, but there's enough potential down there that I still don't feel like you need to pay up. I mean, again, and especially on a slate where, maybe other than DST, like we don't have a ton of really cheap options that we want to rely on. I think you kind of got to, especially for cash games, got to take some relief here. I mean, even just paying down to Mark Andrews is going to save you $1,200. I like the spot at the very least, but Ertz is probably the play down there at Washington. He's going to lose some snaps to Dallas Goedert, but from a PPR perspective, he's just so reliable that I can't really make an argument against him there. I really feel like though, especially for GPPs and tournament lineups, like I'll be building around cheap tight ends. I just don't really have like a solid guy. I feel like, I'm going to smash this guy and be way overweight. It's going to be more of, I'll be mixing in a couple dudes, probably as part of like stacks or just like one-offs. So because of their price, you could talk. Hayden Hurst is projecting to be a little bit chalky. I guess that's maybe the next guy we should talk about. It is a good matchup against Seattle if you like stacking that game. I mean, Hayden Hurst at 4,300. Seattle not great against the tight end last year. They do have Jamal Adams though this year. Patrolling the middle that could make a difference in coverage definitely. So consider that. Hayden Hurst's first game as a Falcon. I mean, these are all things that have me a little bit wary about him. So. I'll probably throw him in a lineup or two, but I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to say you should probably target him as a cash game target just because of that.
I like Hayden Hurst a lot this week. First, the Falcons gave up a lot of draft capital to get him. And so when I see something like that, it just makes me think if a team either trades like relatively high draft pick or uses a relatively high draft pick to draft somebody, I just assume that that's a player that they want to be invested in for the future. So I see that, and I assume that Hurst is going to be a key part of the Falcons offense. The other thing, too, is just look at what Austin Hooper did in that offense last year. And it's not like Austin Hooper is some crazy talented tight end. He's solid, but it's not like he's, some George Kittle or Zach Ertz type guy. And he kind of went nuts for fantasy in the Falcons offense last year. So I just look at Hayden Hurst, and I think he can do a lot of the same things that Hooper did last year. They let Hooper go. They invested a lot in Hurst. So I just assume he's going to go right into that Austin Hooper role. And at 4,300 in what I think is going to be a really good game environment for scoring, per dollar, Hayden Hurst is my favorite tight end on the slate. I'm going Hurst 1, Ertz 2, and Kittle 3. But yeah, I'm really high on Hurst this season.
Okay. And I mean, look, I can't argue with you. I mean, I know I wrote him up as a GPP play this week, and it's a little bit surprised he's getting up there in ownership, but maybe it is. It really, when you sit back and look at it, you're right. Everything is perfect for him in this offense. The reason Hooper got so many targets, I mean, over 70 receptions the last 2 years, teams have to guard against Ridley and Julio on the outside. Like, they have no choice. So, it just leaves the tight end in single coverage all day long in the Atlanta offense, like all the time. And you're right. Like, Austin Hooper is not like a plus athlete, but you don't have to be. Hurst is probably a better athlete than him. So the only thing that worries me, I guess, two things: Jamal Adams being there, and now again, it's just his first game in a new offense. But I can't argue with the price. I agree with the spot. And realistically, when you look down here, this is what I said off the top. I don't have a hot take about anyone else at this price. So I definitely understand why you're projecting him out to be like a top play. Because Goddard, great. I like him as a player, but Ertz is there, so you can't really project him for safety. Hawkinson is all over the place. Like, maybe this is his spot to break out because like Galladay's hurt. So I definitely understand him as a GPP play, but hard to say he's got a better floor than Hurst. He really doesn't. And then you're just going under 4K. These guys are all just they could pop up with a touchdown and a decent game, but they're also all like have huge bust potential. So definitely understand the love for Hurst there.
Yeah, and you mentioned Hawkinson. For him particularly, if Amendola ends up being out too, that's just where I think that Stafford can end up going as the safety valve. Is maybe we see a pretty high target share of Hawkinson if both of those guys are out, and Galladay and Amendola. Moving over to DSTs, I usually don't invest a ton into any one defense. I mentioned before that I like Washington as a contrarian play, particularly if it looks like Wentz is going to continue to get a lot of ownership. Min price for Washington, and where are they? 0.1% projected ownership. Strong front seven going up against a weak offensive line. Give me Washington for no ownership. I think that's a great way to save salary. Is there any other defense that you feel strongly about? I just generally tend to mix them in terms of one that either an expensive offense, an expensive defense, a cheap defense, anything that really stands out to you.
I mean, definitely I'm fine playing the Jets this week. I'll say that. I think they're probably the cash game target. Again, just on a slate with you don't have a ton of value. You can pay up for the Patriots, but that's going to limit you a lot in your builds. And again, Greg Williams against Josh Allen, it's a good matchup. I mean, I know people aren't super high on him as a defensive coordinator, but he brings pressure. Josh Allen's terrible under pressure, man. Like he just is. He turns the ball over. He's not a good passer in there. Maybe the Jets lose this game, but they end up with like a few turnovers, and maybe it's a good spot for them to get a defensive touchdown too. Like realistically, if they're going to win this game, that's what they might have to do. Just looking at some of the ownerships on some of these, I mean, the Patriots look like they're kind of going to be one of the chalkier plays. I don't really like the Chargers. I'll say that. That'll be a pure fade for me. I like Joe Burrow, and I like the fact that the Bengals could just possibly get Joe Mixon running in that game. I'm not going to go as far on the other side and say you should play the Bengals defense, but I definitely fade the Chargers there. I don't really have any huge hot takes. Maybe Seattle again with Jamal Adams back there again. Yeah, it's projected to be a high scoring game. Maybe Atlanta does score 24 points, but maybe Jamal Adams creates some havoc and they end up with like a couple defensive touchdowns. I could see that playing out. I'll probably throw Seattle defense in a lineup or two. I could see that. Otherwise, I'm going cheap this week. I'm going with those two min-price defenses, and I'll just let it ride where it goes, or whatever you want to say. Because I don't really. I want as much savings as possible at this position this week, just with the way the slate's breaking out, and I don't really have any hot takes about the top Ds this week.
I will say this, the Patriots defense is going to be the highest owned in all likelihood at going up against the Dolphins.
Yeah.
If they start this season like they did last year, they scored a million touchdowns, I will be so not happy because there is nothing more annoying in NFL DFS than when a defense breaks the slate, which the Patriots did like 7 weeks in a row last year. They scored a touchdown every week, and it was the dumbest thing ever.
It was ridiculous. It got really annoying, didn't it? I actually forgot about that. So maybe I will have like a little bit of exposure to them after all, but I'll be underweight on the field most likely. But yeah, that is something to think about. They are going to be the heaviest owned DST almost for sure. So couple questions here. Logan Thomas is a value play for tight end, and I don't hate that. 2,800. It's kind of the only guy under 3K I was looking at. Lockett or Metcalf. I'll play Metcalf, but both guys in really good spots there. I mean, you could even go with the double stack, I guess. Although I think if you're going to go with the double stack with Wilson, I'd probably rather mix in Greg Olsen because he's so cheap. So,
all right. So let's wrap with this.
Okay.
You have to make one lineup, one stack. Who would it be? Who would be the quarterback to wide receiver combination, or quarterback, running back, or tight end?
Okay, let's see. What do I got going now here? Let me bring up my page. I am probably going to go one stack. I know I talked about liking all the cheap quarterbacks. I'm gonna go with Russell Wilson with DK Metcalf as my main stack, and probably bring it back with Julio, and maybe even throw a little Greg Olsen in there. That would be my main play of the week, and build around that.
I'm going Mitch Trubisky to Anthony Miller for all the money this week. I want to be like that guy, who is it, Bears fan 3 million or whatever that guy was. Who, remember, it was 2 years ago, a game against the Buccaneers. Trubisky threw 6 touchdown passes, and there was this guy clearly biased whose name was Bears fan and like a bunch of numbers, and he had a 6-man Bears stack and ran back.
That's happened a couple times because it happened with the Steelers before too. Like Steelers fan, like 7-9-8-4 or something won once too when Ben threw 6. So that's the way you got to go, folks. Just stack your favorite team. It'll all work out eventually. You know, may take you 100 weeks, but you'll get there.
Yeah. Sometimes you'd rather just be lucky than good, and you just win with your best team. So that's going to wrap up the show, and it's going to be Geoff and I doing this every Saturday. Pretty excited about that. So with that, guys, stick around. There's going to be the NASCAR show coming up next.